Hi friends, I'm Chelsea and I am here with my fall reading wrap-up. So I figured since it's already December, I should probably talk about the books that I read in October and November. Usually I don't do my wrap-ups this late, but it's been kind of a crazy last couple of months, so this is where we're at, and better late than never, as they say. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about these books. However, I've never done a 2-month reading wrap-up before, and I already have a tendency to ramble, and I have 15 books to talk about, so I'm going to try to keep this as quick and snappy as possible, just kind of give you a quick synopsis, and then just my general pros and cons, thoughts about the book, and then just move on, because I don't want this to be an hour-long video, but I also still want to make sure to give y'all my thoughts and a good review. So hopefully this doesn't feel too rushed or like surface level, but I have 15 books to talk about. So I'm just gonna jump in and tell you about all the books I read this fall. So first up, in October, I read The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry by Gabrielle Zevin. I listened to the audiobook and actually read the ebook. I was away from home and didn't have this physical copy with me, so I got both from the library, but I'm glad I own the book because it was a really good one, and maybe I'll reread it one day using the physical copy. Here's a quick synopsis of the book, and I'm using my reading journal, so if you see me looking down, that's what's happening because I just can't keep all of that information in my brain. AJ is a grumpy, isolated bookstore owner on a small island who is going through a hard time. One day, a mysterious package appears on his doorstep, and his life starts to open up to those around him. I don't want to give away any more than that because there's some stuff that happens that you just need to discover for yourself. And it's a lovely little slice of life kind of story. Very cozy, bookish vibes with him being a bookstore owner. And it's just like a small town island kind of feel. I think it's in the Northeast or Canada. I honestly can't remember already. Some of these books, especially in October, might be a little foggy because it's been 2 months now. Also, here's Adelaide, who always acts wild when I start filming. So other things I liked about this, I really liked the romance. There was a sweet little romance plot. I thought it was very realistic and just really wholesome and sweet. And this book in general was just very wholesome, cozy, like I said. Definitely some found family going on. Quick, easy read. It's like 200 pages. I got through it really quickly. I really connected with a lot of the characters. It definitely had some sad and emotional tones, but overall very heartwarming and also just funny, quirky humor. There were some unexpected twists. It's a literary fiction, so it's not like a fast-paced, like not necessarily page-turner, but there were some things that happened that I wasn't expecting, so I appreciated that. And really my only complaints were that because this book is on the shorter side, to me, it felt a little underdeveloped and like some things kind of moved fast. Like we kind of got a big span of time of these characters' lives, like AJ and Amelia, who is his love interest, and then some other characters. But some things felt like they just moved quickly and we like missed some important things that happened. I don't know if that makes sense. And then, like I said, it's kind of a slower plot. Like there's not a whole lot going on. I didn't dislike that though, but that could be a con to some people. It didn't hit as hard as Tomorrow, Tomorrow, Tomorrow by the same author, which was 5 stars for me, but still really good little book. I wanted more from a certain character's story. Maybe she will get a spin-off. I don't want to spoil it because you don't even know who she is without reading the book. Overall though, I really liked it. This kind of feels like A Man Called Uva and also the movie Dan in Real Life, if you've seen it. It's with Steve Carell, just kind of cozy family, East Coast, small town kind of vibes. Really enjoyed this book, so definitely recommend it. Next up, I read The Spellshop by Sarah Beth Durst. So I started this in September, I think, just reading the physical copy. Could not focus for the life of me. I think it was more of a me problem. So I put it down, and then when we were away from home, I picked up the audiobook, and I didn't even have the physical book with me. So I actually ended up picking back up where I had left off and finishing it on audiobook. And I was able to get through it and enjoy it a lot more the second time. I don't think it was the book that was the issue necessarily. It felt a little slow to me just getting started, but I think I was just not in the mood for a cozy fantasy, I guess, which is weird because I love cozy fantasy. And this one is about Keela, who is an introverted librarian at the Great Library of Elysium, but one day she's forced to flee with her sentient spider plant named Kaz when a revolution begins. So they have to get out of the city. They end up going to this island where she grew up. She kind of gets settled in there. She opens a jam shop shop, which really is a spell shop in disguise, and she finds a family there. That's the quick little synopsis. So another really cozy one, wholesome, found family, cute, sweet, very similar in vibes and feeling to AJ Fikry, except it's kind of more fantasy, obviously. Even with this being cozy, it did have some more higher stakes, some political elements that I wasn't necessarily expecting, but I liked that part of it. There were also some topics of like grief and loneliness, kind of dealing with heavier topics while still being on the lighter side of things. There's also like a very slow burn, wholesome romance, and my favorite thing for sure was Kaz, the spider plant. He was hilarious, just like an anxious little plant that is Keela's best friend, and that relationship was amazing. I always love like a sentient animal or plant or being or whatever. Overall, really liked it. I didn't 100% love the main character from the beginning. She was very standoffish and kind of rude to a lot of the people that she met on the island, but she did grow over time and I grew to like her more. I didn't really feel the chemistry of the romance. That was probably my main complaint with this book. I think it was almost too slow burn maybe, and this is kind of marketed as a romantasy. I think it's more of a fantasy with a romance subplot, so just kind of go into that knowing that. I just didn't fully connect with it, even though I did like the male love interest. And then at times it felt a little juvenile just in the writing and characters. I don't think this is YA, but it kind of felt like it at times. And then, like I said, at the beginning it was kind of a slow start, but I did end up getting back into it and really enjoying it. So definitely recommend. It's not like my top new favorite cozy fantasy, but definitely liked it a lot. And if you like House in the Cerulean Sea or Legends and Lattes, I think you'll enjoy this one. Next up, I read the ebook of Rewitched by Lucy Jane Wood. This one is about Belladonna Blackthorn. She is about to turn 30 and she's trying to balance her bookstore job with being a witch, kind of undercover. And one day she is forced to perform a trial that could make her lose her magic forever. Can she complete the challenge by Halloween night? So this takes place in October, which I'm very glad I read it in October because of that. This definitely kind of felt like Harry Potter to me in some ways. I can't really explain it. It just had like nostalgic Harry Potter vibes. I think it's set in the 90s. It's in London. There's some people she encounters, like her coven pretty much, that feels very much like the Ministry of Magic. So I really liked that. Again, another bookish setting, fall vibes, cozy, just an enjoyable, engaging read. I really liked the love interest, Rune. Another one that's very much a slow burn romance, very light on the romance. I think there's going to be a second book and there might be more romance in that one, hopefully. There were some themes of like self-acceptance and self-love, which I enjoyed. Overall, this was just like a fun, witchy, cozy, good mix of like good plot and characters. The main thing for me, which I kind of just alluded to, was that the romance was almost too slow burn for me. I really liked Rune and I liked Belladonna a lot, so I wanted like more of them. I just think there wasn't as much of an emphasis on the romance as I would have liked. And some parts with the challenge with her trying to keep her magic felt a little repetitive to me at times, and some like predictable plot elements that kind of lost my interest a couple times. I think with cozy fantasy, there's like a fine line of keeping your interest and loving like the cozy, slow paced kind of vibes, but then it can kind of get too slow at times. But overall, another one that I really liked. I was clearly in like a cozy mood at the beginning of October, and so these couple of books really helped with that. And I think if you liked Harry Potter, like I said, and also The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, I think you'll enjoy this one. Next up, I read One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This was a buddy read with Shuba from Shuba Reads Books. Here's a little synopsis if you haven't heard, because this book is quite popular. Elspeth lives in the mist-shrouded kingdom of Blunder, where magic is forbidden except for the kind found in Providence cards. Elspeth and a mysterious highwayman are tasked with finding the 12 Providence cards to cure Blunder from dark magic, while she is facing a monster in her head that she calls the Nightmare. This book is one of the most unique magic systems that I've read. It basically is kind of modeled off of tarot cards, I feel like the Providence cards. They all have different abilities. There are different colors kind of associated with them. Also, there's people who have been infected by the mist who have these different things that are going on with them where they're covering up their magic because, like I said, it's forbidden. So the thing with Elspeth and the monster in her head is not necessarily a normal situation, and so she's trying to deal with this, which the Nightmare, who is the name of the monster, he was like one of my favorite parts about the book. I really enjoyed his banter and dynamic with Elspeth as she's like talking to the this monster in her head. So yeah, I love the magic system, loved the nightmare. Also, there's a big like ensemble cast in this. I really enjoyed that. Also, apart from being very unique, the atmosphere in this was just amazing. Y'all told me it was so atmospheric, and you were right. Like, we got the gothic vibes, very moody, dark, just like cold fall and wintry vibes. So loved that. I love the romance. There's definitely an element of that. It's kind of slow burn-ish, and it's basically like young adult, so nothing too crazy, but I really liked it. I really liked the writing overall, and just lots of really fun twists and turns. This was a page turner for sure. It's not too thick, and it just kind of pulls you in. Really, my only complaint was that I didn't 100% connect with all the characters. I felt like we could have gotten a little more in depth with like their motivations and struggles. I cannot help but compare like fantasy books to Six of Crows, and just the level of depth that you get with those characters is really hard to match. So I feel like I'm always comparing to that book. That's the only reason. I kind of feel like this could have gone a little more in depth on the characters. So yeah, definitely really loved One Dark Window and definitely recommend it. Okay, another book that was a buddy read that I also loved, and another fantasy, is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. Really happy to have finally read this. And this was a buddy read with Cindy from Snacks and Stacks. So this is the story of two sisters, the God King one of them has to marry, the lesser god who doesn't like his job, and the immortal who's still trying to undo the mistakes he made hundreds of years ago. So this follows four plus major characters, different POVs. It's just like this complex political intrigue, religious, classic Brandon Sanderson, where it has all these different elements. It's in the Cosmere, but it's a standalone, which I really love. Although there might be another book coming out, so maybe not a standalone. If there was a sequel that came out, I would totally read it. So another really unique and intricate magic system. It's kind of hard to go into right now in a short time frame, but the magic system kind of revolves around colors and breath, and basically you can use your breath to awaken objects and things, and you kind of control objects through your breath and commands, and you use colors. It probably doesn't make any sense when I talk about it like that, but it's really cool, really unique. We also have a lot of divinity in this, gods that have died and then have come back to life that are called the Returned. They're kind of also like political figures, so we have a lot of politics and religious elements in this. I really loved all the main characters, especially Lightsong, who is this returned god, but he is like the most apathetic, passive god ever, and he was hilarious, but also he had an interesting character arc. And then Ciri, who was one of the sisters who has to marry the God King, she was really interesting too. There's a little romance in this book, so I know people say Brandon Sanderson doesn't do romance, but I actually really enjoyed it in this book. I wanted more, but I didn't expect more because it's Brandon Sanderson. Overall, I really loved this. There's a lot of intrigue, great plot, good mix of humor, but action, good dialogue, world building. Again, he can do no wrong. The only complaints I have with this is that there was one character who had a pretty decent amount of chapters that I wasn't 100% invested in, and then the ending felt like it ended a little abruptly, like it could have been a little longer actually, which is ironic because most of his books are way too long. This one could have had like maybe 50 more pages, and then I also wanted a little more between the sisters and the romance kind of at the end, but otherwise definitely loved, and again, highly recommend. Literally every book I read in October was 4 stars and above, so it was a really good reading month. Here is my only 5-star of the month, which happened to be a reread, and that is Beartown by Frederick Bachman. I feel like I've been talking about this book a lot lately. It deserves it though, because it's so good, and he's just one of my favorite authors. So this was for Ellen Made Book Club. This is about a crumbling hockey town that desperately needs to win the semifinals, but a tragic event occurs that shakes the town, pits people against each other, and gives us a glimpse into the complexity of humanity. And I think that's what Bachman is best at. He just writes people so well, and characters, they just feel so real, and you can just feel all the emotions when you're reading. I am so attached to the characters. I'm so attached to the characters in these books, and they feel so real to me. And so rereading this was just a great experience. I remembered some things and then I didn't remember others, but I just felt even more attached to these characters as I was reading. I just love his writing. It's so profound, and it's a great mix of humor and then kind of heavier hitting topics and just like one-liners that just hit you and you're like, I just need to stop and think about what I just read. Yeah, I felt all the feelings while I was reading this. This is definitely a book that has many POVs, like it jumps around a lot, even in the chapters. That could be a little jarring for some people. I love that kind of storytelling, so it didn't bother me. But just know going into this that there's a lot of POVs and we don't really focus on one main character. I also just love the small town, kind of cold, wintry setting. Just again, the themes in this book, there's some heavier ones, but I just love the way he writes about life and people. This is still a 5-star for me, but because I had already read it once, there were some moments that didn't hit as hard emotionally because I knew it was coming, and that's just kind of the nature of a reread. That doesn't mean it's any less impactful or powerful, and I do remember first time around kind of like crying my eyes out at the end of this book, and I didn't really do that this time because, again, I kind of knew it was coming. But I just love this series and these characters, so highly recommend if you're considering checking out this author. I would say start with this book. Okay, and then the last book I read in October was Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. This was another buddy read, and this was with Melanie from A Dark Corner of the Library. So quick synopsis here. In 1840s Mexico, Nena knows a thing or two about monsters, both human and supernatural. After an attack from a sinister creature and the attack on Mexico by the US, Nena and Nestor face their future together. Again, very quick, brief synopsis. And Nestor is kind of her love interest. There's a pretty heavy romance in this, so Nena and Nestor are the main characters. I liked this one as well. Love the setting, very atmospheric, another great kind of fall read. I love the historical setting. This one was dual POV, which I always love. And again, there is a romance in this. It was more than I expected for like a supernatural Western or thriller is what this is marketed as, but it has a heavy romance element, which could be a pro or con for some people. I personally loved it, and I thought the romance was really sweet. I really liked both of the main characters. Loved the writing. It was beautiful, kept me engaged. There were some good action scenes, eeriness, ominous, mystery elements. I also kind of liked her comparison between the vampires, like actual supernatural creatures, but also the vaqueros, which are, I think that means cowboys in English, especially like the colonization of Mexico by the Americans, and just comparing like different types of monsters, both real and supernatural. I thought that was done really well. Really for this, what I wanted more of was the vampires and like the horror elements. I think if there had been less emphasis on the romance, we would have gotten a little more of the vampires, just some more of those scenes that you would expect in like a supernatural kind of book, I guess. I also wanted a little more of like the historical context and some explanations. That felt like more of the backdrop to me, and I always like learning more about like historical events that especially I don't know much about, so I kind of wanted more of that. It was a bit slow moving at times. With it being a Western, there were some moments where they're just kind of like traveling out in the desert or wherever they were. They were in Mexico, kind of on the border between Texas and Mexico. So there were some slower moving moments, kind of a forgettable plot if I'm being honest. As I'm thinking about it now, I'm like, I don't remember a ton of what happened, but I just remember really enjoying it while I was listening to it. Again, another one I do recommend, and I want to read more books by this author. So that was October. Again, really good reading month. Loved all the books I read. November was a bit more of a mixed bag, but still a good month overall, and I read 8 months in November. I started it off strong with Butcher and Blackbird by Brynne Weaver. I know I mentioned that I was scared of this book, but I'm happy to report that I really loved it. And it wasn't as bad as I thought, so I'll get into that after I tell you the synopsis. When a chance encounter sparks an unlikely bond between rival murderers, Sloane and Rowan, they begin an annual game against the most dangerous monsters in the country. A rivalry then develops into something more, and chaos ensues. And yeah, when I think about this book, the word chaos definitely pretty much sums it up, and I loved that. It was just ridiculous and chaotic. It was a good time, you know? Not anything too crazy or deep, just a fun one. I really liked the two main characters. This one is also dual POV. I really liked their romance, their relationship, their friendship and rivalry, and just all of their interactions. I was honestly just eating it up, and I loved it. I wish I had been able to listen to the audiobook. I've heard that it's really good, but I didn't have access to it, so I just read the physical book. Okay, some other things I like. It was hilarious. Definitely laughed out loud multiple times. Just unhinged in the best way. Lots of fun little twists and turns. Some good action scenes where it got a little crazy, a little tense, a little gory. There's definitely some gross moments, spicy scenes, like the trigger warnings are there, but as Mimi said when she was convincing me to read this book, the trigger warnings are there, but it's not as bad as it seems, at least to me. Some people who are more sensitive to like violence and gore and spice might disagree and think that it's too much. I personally thought it was just the right amount and really enjoyed it. The only complaints really were that the first half felt a little bit repetitive with the whole murder competition. It felt like we were kind of getting the point of their annual murder competition, and I wanted it to kind of move in a different direction, which it did in the second half, and I enjoyed the second half a lot more. There were definitely some gross moments and some cringy, like spicy scenes, but again, I really enjoyed it overall. I was surprised by this, and I do want to check out the second book. Okay, I probably should have just talked about these two books together because my thoughts are very similar on this. So this is Beartown Book 2, Us Against You by Frederick Bachman. I listened to the audiobook and did the physical book. I should have mentioned that. I also did that for Beartown, a little bit of immersion reading and going back and forth. I can't tell you a ton about what's happening because it's book 2, but basically Beartown is picking up the pieces after the events of book 1, both emotionally and with the hockey team. They're kind of rebuilding. New people arrive in town, teenagers are growing up, and more tragedy occurs. A lot of what I said about Beartown applies here. Again, just love his writing, love the themes he talks about. He really covers it all, like parenthood, marriage, growing up, coming of age kind of stuff, what it's like to be a teenager, friendship, kind of the toxicity that can happen in sports sometimes, especially with the dynamics between men and women. Also, yeah, just topics of grief and carrying on after loss, especially some characters are dealing with that in this book. He just writes it so well. I'm going to keep saying it. I sobbed at the end of this. I could not take it. There was something that happened that just got me. Some new characters that I really loved that I wasn't expecting, focusing on the characters that we know and love as well. Another thing I love about these books is the foreshadowing. There's like so many moments where you get a little snippet of what's to come, things that happen in the future that we haven't read about yet. It just creates this sense of like foreboding almost, but also like comfort knowing what's coming for these characters, and it just makes you want to keep reading. The only thing that made this not a 5-star for me was that the first like 25% of this book felt like a recap of book 1, and there were some things that felt like didn't really need to be there, so it felt a little longer because of all the recapping. And then there were also a lot more politics with the hockey team because of some things that had happened in the first book, so I didn't really love like the political elements, and I don't really care about sports. So when it focused on that, it kind of lost me a little bit, but otherwise, love it. Okay, here's where we finally have a book that is under 4 stars. I don't want you to think that I just love every book I read, which obviously that's the goal. We all want to love them all. This next one was a disappointment, not gonna lie. And it's a popular book, so I might be the only person who feels this way. Seems like it. This book was All the Colors of the Dark by Chris Whitaker. This was for my in-person book club. I mostly listened to the audiobook. I did have the physical book, but I loaned it to a friend in our book club, and I don't really care to get it back, if I'm being honest. This one is set in 1975 in Montclair, Missouri, and girls are disappearing. Patch, who is one of the main characters, he rescues one of the girls, then he goes down a path of obsession, searching, heartbreak, leaving his loved ones to pick up the pieces. And it's really hard to give a synopsis of this book. I feel like there's so many things that could be spoiled, and it's also just hard to encapsulate this book. It felt like a little bit all over the place to me, and it's like 600 pages, so there's a lot that happens in it. So I'll start with the things I liked. Love that this had short chapters. They were literally like 1 to 4 pages, so it's really easy to read it quickly, even though it's a long book. I just kind of like binged this because of that, so that was helpful to get through it. Saint is Patch's best friend, and she is one of the other main characters. She honestly carried this book for me. If she was not in this book, I probably would have rated it even lower. I really liked her a lot and was just rooting for her, and I wanted more for her because of how Patch treated her, but I'll get to that. I felt this was very rooted in the historical setting. Like you could just kind of imagine being in like the 70s and 80s. And I did feel fairly invested throughout, even though ultimately I didn't love it. There were some funny moments too. I definitely laughed a couple times, but it's overall pretty dark and serious kind of book. So what I didn't like, it felt just too long for me and slow pace. Like even with the short chapters, there were some times where it just felt like nothing was happening and just boring. It took a long time for anything to happen, and there were a lot of times where something exciting almost happened and I almost got really like into it, and then it would kind of just fizzle out. I kind of liked the writing at first, but then ultimately I was just kind of confused by it. I kept having to reread things and it felt just overly descriptive where I just was getting lost. I'm like, what's the point of what's happening? So this book is marketed as a serial killer thriller, and let me tell you right now, it is not. It's kind of like God of the Woods, where it's kind of marketed as a thriller, which both of these books I would say are definitely heavily in the literary fiction with a little mystery, kind of a slow burn character book. No way is this a thriller. Like there were maybe 2 serial killer scenes. I wanted more of that. I just think that it shouldn't be marketed as that because it's not a fast-paced thriller kind of story. And I really did not like Patch, one of the main characters. I just didn't like his decisions that he made and like how he treated Saint and a lot of other people. I get that he's not a perfect character. No one is a perfect person, but I just had a really hard time connecting with him, and he was such a big part of the book that it kind of just left a bad taste in my mouth, I guess. And I didn't really love the ending. It was kind of wrapped up in a bow, but it still felt unsatisfying to me, and I just kind of felt nothing, honestly, by the end. So it sounds harsh. There were some things I liked, but I think this one was overly hyped, and since I loved God of the Woods so much, I think I was just comparing this too much to that, and that was kind of a letdown. So anyway, moving on, I listened to The Third Gilmore Girl by Kelly Bishop. This was really fun. This is pretty much just about her life and career. Also, if you don't know, she's Emily Gilmore in the show Gilmore Girls. It goes into her Gilmore Girls experience, but also like her 6 decades in show business. Started out as a dancer and then like Broadway, movies, all the way to Gilmore Girls. So that was really cool to learn about her background. I love musical theater and Gilmore Girls and all that, so that was really fun to hear about, especially like her time in New York City. She just seems very ambitious, determined, confident, but also just very positive and supportive. She seems like a great person. This was a really quick, easy read. It's like 7 hours. It's just really fun to listen to. This mainly focused on her career, like a little bit on relationships, but mostly on her career, so it wasn't like the most impactful or deep memoir necessarily, so it's not like my top memoir that I've listened to, but it was still really a good time. I will say we didn't get to Gilmore Girls till like 60% in, and then it was kind of a small element of the book, so if you're going into it expecting like a lot of Gilmore Girls, don't think that it's going to be like that. You're going to get her whole life with a little bit of Gilmore Girls and then move on, but definitely a fun memoir to listen to. Okay, if things look different, it's because I had to get up and grab a book that I read because I forgot I read it, and honestly that kind of sums up this book, which is a little upsetting. Maybe this is another hot take. Maybe I'm the problem. I don't know. If you love this book, so sorry. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. So this is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I started out with the audiobook, and then I quickly realized this is not the kind of book that you can listen to an audiobook. I was very confused. So I quickly switched to the physical while still listening to the audio. So yeah, if you're trying to listen to Ninth House on audiobook, I would definitely recommend not doing that just because there's too much going on and it went right over my head. This book is about Alex Stern, who grew up in LA. She had kind of a rough, dark past, but she is recruited by Yale to monitor the activities of their secret societies, and she soon discovers that there are sinister and potentially paranormal things happening, but she also has some secrets of her own. So this is one of my favorite authors. Six of Crows is kind of like the gold standard now for me. Loved Crooked Kingdom, loved The Familiar, and so I was kind of sad that this one didn't impact me as much, but I will tell you a little bit about what I liked, what I didn't like. So I definitely love the setting, like the dark academia feel, the secret societies, there's a murder mystery, supernatural elements. The vibes were great. I liked all of that. And we have dual timelines and POVs, which were a little confusing, but also, once I got into it, I enjoyed that. And I did like Alex, the main character, for the most part. Wasn't as connected to her until towards the end, but I did like her as the main character. The last 20% of this book was great. The first 80% was a bit hard to get through, but I'll stick with the prose for now. I think it's a really interesting premise. I really liked Darlington, who was one of the characters as well. I wanted more of him, but I'm thinking maybe we'll get more in the second book, potentially. Honestly, it took me so much of this book to even get into it. I was kind of confused at first. It just felt really slow, like it was combining a lot of things together. Also, sorry if you hear loud noises. They're working on who knows what in the apartment up above. Anyway, so yeah, I was confused a lot and it was a lot to keep track of, especially while listening. Once I started reading physically, it started to make more sense. But yeah, even once I did that, I just wasn't that invested or engaged. I don't know, something felt different about her writing in this book. Like character stuff didn't hit as hard and it just felt even darker than normal, which obviously it's dark academia, so what would you expect? It just didn't hit me as hard as her other books for some reason. There's definitely some dark and disturbing scenes. It didn't bother me too much, but definitely a lot of trigger warnings to check on this one. Again, the ending was great, but it took so much for me to just get into it and understand what was happening and to be invested. So I don't know, it's kind of sad because I wanted to love this. I still love this author. I still would probably recommend this book for people who might be more into this than me. I don't know. And I still do want to read the second book. So, you know, it's not a complete loss. There's my kind of wishy-washy review of Ninth House. Next up, I've read The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. This was a buddy read with Jessica from Jessica's library card, and this one's kind of hard to give a synopsis of, but I will try my best. So Vida Winter is a famous author known for tall tales and secrecy. She asks Margaret, a young biographer, to record her real-life story, and we enter into a tale of gothic strangeness, twins, ghosts, governesses, literature, while these two face their own unique and dark pasts. Definitely a gothic book. I've heard that it's great for fall. Totally is. I think it's good for winter as well. So very atmospheric. I also liked the bookish elements with this being an author, and the other main character, Margaret, she loves to read. And there's a lot of references to Jane Eyre, which I have not read, but it definitely has that kind of vibe. I also like that it's kind of like a story within a story, and it was more of a mystery than I expected. I didn't really know what to expect, but enjoyed the twists and turns, and there was a really good twist at the end that I was not expecting. There's just kind of an overall eerie, almost supernatural feel. It's not really, but it kind of had that ominous feel throughout. The writing was beautiful, really good. I liked a lot of the characters. It felt kind of like a fever dream at points, which I always enjoy in a book. I really liked the ending too. So this was a really good one. It surprised me because I really didn't know what to expect at all. The only thing really is that it was a pretty slow start. Took me a while to get into it. Once I was into it though, I really enjoyed it. It felt like every time I picked it back up, I kind of had to like get into it, if that makes sense. Again, that could be me, or that could be just that it's a slower book. And then I was a little confused at first, like moving between different storylines, but again, once I got into it, that was fine. There's definitely some disturbing characters and sibling relationships. I'll just leave that there. Just some weird things going on. Really enjoyed this story overall. Definitely recommend it. All right, 2 more books and then we're done, which is good because my throat's getting really hoarse. Okay, this is a library book. This is The Village Library Demon Hunting Society by C.M. Wagner. Another kind of bookish, cozy book. It's like a cozy fantasy mystery. This is about a librarian with a knack for solving murders who realizes there's something supernatural afoot in her small town. We have a talking, possessed cat, a priest, many murders, and a group of friends who help Sherry, the librarian, in her search for the truth. This is definitely more on the cozy mystery side. We do have the fantastical, supernatural elements, but I'd say it's more heavy on the mystery. This was hilarious. I was already laughing a lot from the beginning. It's a quick read, pretty short, just kind of ridiculous and unrealistic in a good way, sometimes over the top, but for the most part, it was pretty fun. I loved Sherry, the main character. She's older. I think she's in her 60s. And so I like that we got kind of an older main character. It reminded me of the Thursday Murder Club a little bit. I liked the main mystery. I felt like it was pretty fun and engaging. I also loved that there was a priest involved in like trying to exorcise demons, grouping up with this ridiculous cast of characters. He was pretty funny. He was kind of like an incompetent priest who wasn't skilled in exorcisms. It was a funny dynamic, so love that. Love the cat, of course. I love the first 100 pages. It really like gripped me. Then I kind of got used to the story and writing, and then I was just like liking it. I wasn't like obsessed with it as I went on. The demon parts got like a little ridiculous and over the top. Like I said, there's kind of a fine line of it being just the right amount of ridiculous, and I feel like sometimes it went over the top a little. I wanted a little more of like the society, since that's literally in the title. It wasn't heavy on that, and I also wanted a little more fantasy than mystery. I felt like sometimes she was trying to combine a lot of things. I was a little confused how the supernatural stuff fit in with like the real life mystery. That's hard to really go into without spoiling it. So some things felt like a little too much going on, a little ridiculous, but overall definitely a fun, quick read that I would definitely recommend. And this is a fairly new release, so that was fun to check out. Okay, the last book. This is O Caledonia by Elspeth Barker. This was my blind date with a book that I finally read, and my mom picked this book for me as well. I'm very glad I finally read this. This is basically like a modern classic. I think it was written in the 90s, and it's about Janet, who lies murdered beneath the castle stairs, attired in her mother's black dress, lamented only by her pet jackdaw. This is not a murder mystery, but a coming-of-age story about an isolated, misunderstood girl who finds solace in nature, animals, and books. Definitely a unique story. I, again, didn't really know what to expect with this one. First of all, the writing was wonderful. It was not that hard to understand, even though it's a little older. Beautiful descriptions, great atmosphere, another gothic kind of story. It's set in Scotland. Definitely made me think about some things, but also feel the emotions. Really, this is just like a character study zoomed in on this one girl. I really felt for Janet, even though she was not necessarily the most likable character. Enjoyed just reading about her life, and it was just a good reading experience. Nothing fast-paced or mind-blowing necessarily, but it was just like a lovely little read. It was a pretty easy and quick read as well. There were a lot of really funny, subtle, humorous moments that I was not expecting. It was a fun, I don't know, it feels weird to say fun time because it was kind of bleak, but I enjoyed my reading experience of this. It's definitely a little slow. There's literally nothing that happens, no plot. But if you like character-based stories, good atmosphere, good writing, just kind of slice of life kind of stories, I definitely think you would like this. I felt like the ending was kind of abrupt and left me wanting a little more, very bleak and depressing in some ways. This book is kind of hard to talk about. It's one of those things I feel like you just have to read, then you'll be like, what did I just read? But I really enjoyed it. At least that's how I felt. I also love this cover. It's pretty cool. And yeah, I love that Janet, she really just loves like nature, animals, and books and stuff. Like I said, she finds solace in that, but it's very sad because she's just misunderstood and like no one likes her. But I think it's a good book, so just go into it knowing that. That is my fall reading wrap up. As always, let me know your thoughts if you've read any of these books or if any of them are on your TBR, what your top favorite books were from this fall. As always, thanks so much for watching. I will see you in my next video. Bye!